Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, friends and guests of NDI, friends of democracy. This picture shows Nigerians on election day. And this man is actually not taking my picture, but he is checking out the vote count that's happening behind me. This gentleman is my constituent. I'm going to introduce you to the rest of my virtual constituents. And let me be clear, I was elected into office in the Netherlands, and the European Parliament has not suddenly developed superpowers. But in the decisions I make, I think it's important to always keep in mind what impact they have across borders on these people. What I want to talk about this afternoon is the paradox, or the tension, between our legal and political structures grounded in jurisdiction, nation states, and the seemingly borderless global environment or constituency that we find in the internet public, enabled by technology. This new reality, or connected world, is creating new responsibilities as well as opportunities for all of us who are working on the democratic and the democratization project. So the question is, how do we foster democracy in a hyper-connected world? Despite poverty, 53% of African people own mobile phones, which are becoming more and more smart and allow them to use these phones for more than calls and text messages. They offer windows to the world, and they provide us with a window into these people's lives. Although not designed with this goal in mind, the internet and other technologies have led to all kinds of exciting opportunities to bring the democratic project closer to its promise and its potential. It directly puts power in the hands of individuals and challenges traditional monopolies of power and information. It challenges politics, state, and media as we know it. And I believe that giving up some control can gain a lot of legitimacy, but technologies are a double-edged sword because those who fear sharing power and losing control are increasingly using internet and technologies to repress. Our world has become increasingly more connected. Our lives cross borders all day long. We can read the New York Times in Jakarta, listen to a live stream of Adele from Johannesburg. We can exchange Facebook and Twitter messages with friends in Moscow, Bhutan, Italy, Australia, Charlotte, you name it. And where human rights abuses were traditionally documented by NGOs or the media, it is now users that can make us all eyewitness to the world's most painful atrocities. Since the beginning of the violent crackdown in Syria, more than 100,000 clips have been uploaded on YouTube. People risk their lives to put these clips online because they believe that making us witnesses may help them achieve their goal of self-determination and peace more quickly. Some governments try to reclaim the control and the power that they've lost online. In Iran in 2009, we got to know Neda Agha Soltan, who remains a reminder of the importance of the struggle for freedom to me every day. We both criticized our government. She paid with her life. I got elected. I learned about her, like so many of you, as eyewitnesses to the brutal government crackdown on Iranian demonstrators. Clips filmed with smartphones moved the world and inspired a generation in the Middle East. If Iranians could defy their fears, anything is possible. It also shows the enormous power of peaceful calls for freedom, and this is precisely what the regime fears most. So since then, the regime of the Islamic Republic has decided the only way to retain power is to cut Iranians off of the World Wide Web and to build an intranet for Iran, which it calls halal, censored for harmful information, monitored by the state. In Syria, attempts to build a monitoring system that would allow government access to all email and mobile conversations was built by the Electronic Army, which is now subject to European and American sanctions. The government-led attacks on citizens happened online before bullets were fired in the streets. The strategy even included a temporary lift of Facebook, which was banned in Syria until early 2011. And many young Syrians were glad that they could join their peers across the world and also share pictures, jokes, flirts, and ideas. But the relative openness, as some had feared, turned out to be a trap, a way to seduce people to share information, and information that was later used to track and trace them, to find out who was talking to who, to identify networks of opposition and human rights activists. The Ben Ali regime in Tunisia was well known for its sophisticated and systematic use of technology against people. China is ensuring what the government calls national harmony through the use of the Great Firewall, which catches people in China in a virtual bunker. A search query for Tiananmen Square renders 0 results in this bunker, and information that is exchanged on Baidu, the Chinese version of Twitter, the microblogging service, is still subject to mining and monitoring. In Egypt, a young man, Khaled Said, was kicked to death by the police, and many Egyptians believed he was a symbol, that this could have been them. They created a Facebook group saying, "We are all Khaled Said." And later, young Egyptians called for demonstrations on January 25th, and the rest is history. Yet, the government of Mubarak was so afraid for these calls for freedom that he went as far as shutting down all internet and mobile traffic in the country. Sadly, these limitations to access to technologies also happen closer to home in democracies. In the United Kingdom, the government called for a ban on instant messaging following riots that erupted last year in London. Especially in democracies, we should always be reminded that freedom and security go hand in hand. Others seek to use the internet to expand their sphere of influence online. Music and movie industries in America, but also Europe, push for laws allowing for the monitoring of internet surfing and the blocking of websites in their fight against piracy. These industries push the outsourcing of police and law enforcement to private companies, internet service providers, without democratic oversight, redress, checks, and balances. This has a huge impact, especially when enforcement of American laws is pushed across borders involving non-US citizens running non-US businesses from outside of the US. The American Patriot Act can apply to all information in cloud services when they are brought by American companies, even while users live abroad. And Ellie Pariser pointed out the risk of the so-called filter bubble, where one person may look at a completely different outcome of a search entry in a search engine than another person, or may look at very different results on Facebook, even if they have the same friends. This kind of filtering, with the purpose of attracting more advertisers, creates a tunnel vision of which the consequences are hard to predict, but which we should keep in mind. While internet and new technologies have created revolutionary opportunities for the advancement of human rights and for the emancipation of the individual, serious questions of how to ensure the rule of law applies online remain. De facto global constituencies and consumer bases emerge. Let's call them the internet public. They do not have the power to hold leadership accountable, and this is not very democratic. As old power structures are challenged, new ones emerge, and transparency and accountability need to take shape in new forms and have to be applied in new contexts. Internet is not only a vehicle towards more democracy, but it also changes the foundation of it. Individuals around the world can potentially be empowered and use internet as enablers for human rights, such as free speech, free press, access to information, and freedom of assembly. But the extraterritorial impact of laws of a nation state through the use of online services incorporated on their territory leads to a new set of responsibilities on the part of governments and companies alike. We will see more conflicts between governments, for example, on the extradition of suspects. Normally and ideally speaking, citizens can hold those who make laws accountable in democratic elections, but not online companies or the lawmakers of countries where these companies are registered. Our legal and technical concepts do not apply equally in different contexts. How legitimate is it, for example, to sell technologies designed for so-called lawful interception to countries where the rule of law does not exist? Technological standards do not exist in a vacuum. While many consider internet a public sphere, technologies and internet are mostly owned by private companies. The power that governments lose do not only get redistributed to people, but a lot leaks to companies which make and run technologies that are not designed with democracy and human rights in mind. The impact of companies crosses borders and challenges jurisdictions of the nation state and thus the sphere and influence of lawmakers. Companies are generally in the business of making money and design their technologies for that purpose. And this can lead to a gradual slippery slope which is dangerous unless it is held accountable for the negative effects of seeking profit above all else. The incentive to continue to do business in a repressive country too often outweighs the responsibility of companies to respect human rights. European and American companies are among the top sellers and exporters of technologies that are used for filtering, surveillance, monitoring, and censoring of people from Syria to Iran, from China to Bahrain. Now, how does this digital arms trade by companies relate to statements by our governments condemning human rights violations? Even if these companies operate legally, they're morally wrong. We see plenty of bad practices. Vodafone, Europe's biggest telecom operator, was a majority shareholder of Vodafone Egypt and complied with the orders the Mubarak regime gave to shut down all internet and mobile services while passing text messages from the government. Nokia Siemens Networks, a European company, provided Iran with mobile networks, including monitoring capacities. Yahoo handed over personal information of a human rights activist to the Chinese authorities, who then imprisoned him for 10 years. But there are also some good practices. Twitter considers the protection of free speech an integral part of its business case. And Google provides transparency reports on requests by governments and content providers when they ask for the takedown of content. But I would like to see them provide more transparency on how information is selected and filtered, because this impacts the relationship between minority opinions and minority opinions, also very important in a democracy. YouTube, together with the NGO called Witness, an expert on video and human rights, recently developed a face blurring tool, allowing human rights activists to blur out faces of people who might be endangered if they would be exposed online. We can see that the internet has become an arena for various power plays, and multilateral fora, such as the United Nations, are the latest extension of this kind of arena. We should join in fighting attempts by authoritarian states, as well as by telecom operators, who seek to control through rules made in two UN organizations when they hurt the open internet and especially the freedom of users. There's a few very dangerous proposals that are now put on the table, so please all watch the International Telecoms Union meeting that is coming up later this year, as well as the discussions at the Internet Governance Forum of the United Nations. What more can politicians like us do to help foster democracy in a connected world? I urge you all to embrace digital freedom on your political agendas. The open character of the internet is what has made it into the great success that it is, and in particular, users need to be more protected. I'm certainly not going to advocate over-regulation, but rather the integration and mainstreaming of technologies in human rights laws and democracy processes. There is no need to create many new laws, but we must just make sure that human rights and corporate social responsibility laws or competition laws apply regardless of the medium or platform. The global internet public needs to be considered, so companies should apply the principle that's called know your end user in the context of social corporate responsibility. And export policies need to include an assessment of the context in which technologies will be used. Perhaps we should think about human rights by design. This would mean that the potential to foster democracy, the rule of law, and human rights will be built in when designing technologies and online services, and the potential harmful impact would be assessed already in the research and development phase. Transparency and accountability of globally operating technology firms should be improved, and the formation of new monopolies should be prevented. Governments must guarantee the public value of access to information and fight the privatization of law enforcement on internet through, for example, internet service providers. And finally, governments and politicians should educate themselves on the role of technology and develop policies that can help educate and defend human rights defenders and activists in the same field. Power is eroding away from governments to companies, and in good cases, to internet users, and this is both exciting and troubling. Exciting because of the empowerment of individuals and the opportunity for them to freely assemble and express themselves, to document and share human rights abuses. Troubling because of the lack of transparency and accountability of companies and the growing role that governments play in an attempt to increase their power and to control online, while citizens cannot hold these lawmakers or companies accountable. Without clarity about jurisdiction online, local laws applied to claim global liability, so cross borders, can have very harmful effects on human rights, but also on business. Us politicians cannot govern the internet alone. I think that is very clear. So governments, companies, NGOs, and citizens must work together. This so-called multi-stakeholder model has developed organically without much control from the top, and it serves the interest of the people online and especially their freedoms best. If we ensure inclusion, every individual can make his or her voice heard, so that we can work on true democracy in a globally connected world. Thank you.